Finance Minister Arun Jaitley there responding to several questions and queries and clarifications that were sought by various ministers on issues like multiple registrations for the banking sector, on the compensation issue, on the anti-profiteering clause, on the definition of agriculture and what will be exempted, and even on the issue of what happens as far as the state of Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. Our panel of experts have been sitting patiently listening to the proceedings in Parliament. Rohan Shah, let me come to you first. Has he been able to allay some of the concerns that we had as far as the anti-profiteering clause in specific is concerned? He said there should not be unfair enrichment. The government will eventually decide, or the GST Council will decide, whether the powers need to be rested with a central body, a central authority, or with an existing authority. But the message very clearly from the Finance Minister was that, look, you must return back what you make by way of the GST.
That's true. So I think 3 or 4 points important. One, very clearly, he said no unjust enrichment. He hasn't discounted the factor that, there will be other economic factors impacting on price and profit. I think he's far too intelligent to not sort of take those into account. The other factor, I think, which is of some importance is, we are going by the language which says shall.
Yes.
But what we have to understand is there is a mandate of the law and then there's the machinery provision. Here, the machinery provision will make a big difference because the machinery provision will dictate what you're targeting, how you intend to go about it, and what the real scope of power of the relevant authority is. And as he said, they'll decide where they vest this. So from my perspective, while he hasn't provided all the answers, which he couldn't, what he's telling you very clearly is that the focus is against unjust enrichment. The focus is against some people who have a benefit, taking the benefit home and not passing it through in the stream of the consumption. And I think in this particular provision, the machinery provision will make a huge impact because I think that will really determine the scope and the vigor with which they will go out and pursue this.
Okay. Pratik, one of the issues and concerns that we had raised was the issue of keeping the state of Jammu and Kashmir outside the ambit of the goods and services tax. What we've now heard from the Finance Minister, and this is also now being corroborated by our sources, is that the state of Jammu and Kashmir will move an act in its own assembly and then will integrate itself with the goods and services tax. So in that sense, it looks like to some degree the concern that we had perhaps has been allayed, and this will be done keeping in mind the July 1 rollout, so well ahead of the July 1 rollout of the GST.
Yes, but I'm not very clear still about J&K because I heard Finance Minister saying that central laws are not applicable in J&K, whereas today the excise duty, for example, and custom duty is equally applicable in J&K, right? So I don't understand really as to why do we need to really have a specific provision for J&K and why this need was felt now and not earlier. The other point is that even if you assume that they replicate the same laws, which is the CGST and SGST laws, and pass in their assembly, what will happen to a transaction which happens between J&K and some other state? So if I'm supplying something from Delhi to J&K, I can't levy IGST because under the IGST law, J&K is outside the definition of India. So what tax will be applicable? Then that would mean that there is some kind of a purchase tax or a tax in the reverse charge, which a business in J&K will have to pay. So I think the government needs to come out and provide some more clarity on that. It's good that, to say that they will get the replica laws passed in the assembly, but I'm not clear as to what will be the mechanism.
Okay, we will try and connect with the State Finance Minister, Mr. Haseeb Drabu, to try and get more clarifications on that. But on the issue, Mani, of multiple registrations, and that was a question that was raised earlier on today. That's a concern that we have raised here on the show as well. He said that it will be a matter that will be looked into. This is exactly what he told us on Friday when we interviewed him, saying that, look, states have to come on board. The centre is on board with the need to have a central registration, but state governments have to come on board. I don't think that he's given a very clear assurance on that front. What was your sense?
I would say that I was actually very happy to hear from him that they are considering it even now at this stage.
Yeah.
Because when that question was asked, what possibly would have been a dampener would be for him to say that, look, once the law is passed, then nothing else can be done. But what he said, to me, signified that they're even now looking at some kind of a possibility where large financial institutions or telecom companies, for instance, may not be required to take registration in all the states where they operate, but there could be some kind of a via media. So this could be done by ensuring that they are technically registered in each state, but they file a consolidated return, for example. He also mentioned very interestingly the section in the CGST law which permits them to do that, where they have been given a facility to have any sort of a change in respect of returns, in respect of payments, in respect of tax filings, and in respect of audits. So to me, it seemed to signify that when we have certain expert groups which are looking into each industry, and the report of these expert groups is being considered possibly in due earnest, it seems to me that there is still hope for maybe a modified form of centralized registration, not centralized registration the way it exists today, but equally not a registration where somebody was mentioning that we will need to file 2,000 returns all over the country for one particular bank.
Yeah.
So it may not be so draconian, but it may not be as simple as it is today either.
So we'll have to look and see if we arrive at a suitable middle path. But Hari, on one of the other concerns that was raised, and that had to do with this business of can they extend the scope of the cess beyond the current 5 or 6 products to include other products as well? You heard what the finance minister said, that this is, this is part of the drafting process, and the intent is not to tax anything more than sin goods or luxury items. Are you convinced by what you heard from the finance minister?
Well, I'm definitely happy to hear that he allayed those fears, saying that the demerit goods are the only ones which they intend to apply a cess on. So at least to that extent, he was pretty clear. Also, I was happy to hear from him say that in the GST regime, to create a common market, there has to be a common rate across all states. So some of these doubts have been allayed. As far as centralized registration is concerned, I agree. I think there seems to be some hope that could be there from a procedural aspect, vis-a-vis compliance for financial institutions and telecom companies and others. That could still be a window open, and the working committee group looking at this particular sector, I think, will play a very, very important role in the coming days. I feel there is some hope. I don't know how that hope will translate into compliance for this sector, but there is some hope. So both these are important, and I think on an anti-profiteering, it's very clear that the intention is to ensure that the benefit, if any, either in the form of credit or in the form of reduction of rate, is passed on in the chain. So that's very clear. The only thing that I would like them to clarify is how will the methodology work, and the methodology should be such that it's not too intrusive and it not ends up doing a policing kind of a function. That's the only worry that people have. The anti-profiteering is given, right? The sections are there, the machinery provisions are there, so that will happen. So that's another thing which is interesting, which he mentioned, Shirin, which I really don't know whether is that right. He mentioned about petroleum products in the constitution for coverage under GST, but will come in at a later stage. But at the same time, he made a statement that they will be zero rated. So I don't know whether that is true, because there have been debates in the past, and there have been enough representations of considering it to be zero rated even in the initial period, and I don't think the industry has met with success on that. So I don't know what that statement meant. So I would be very keen to understand, is there a rethink, or when he meant zero rated, he just basically fundamentally meant that they will come into GST at a later rate. So that's another critical aspect which he mentioned. I don't know what that real intent was.
Rohan, you want to comment on that? I mean, he talked about petroleum, he talked about alcohol, he talked about real estate. Real estate, hopefully, he says, I support the decision to actually include it in the ambit of the GST, but maybe that's something we'll look at a year down the line. But on the specific point of petroleum products that Hari was mentioning?
So what they've done is the only constitutional exclusion is alcohol. Everything else, therefore, has a scope of coming in. The zero rating in terms of petroleum, I think, refers to the fact that they can give a deemed export status to petroleum to the extent that the transaction is one of international competitive bidding. If that effectively happens, then what you will get is a deemed export. and the deemed export will go into that nil rated category, is I think how they are looking to play it right now.
Okay. Sachin, on the back of what you've heard from the Finance Minister, what is your big takeaway as we get down to Parliament voting on this crucial legislation?
Well, I think some of those statements are a little conflicting. For example, now they have increased the rate of tax to 20% under CGST, SGST, which is an enabling provision. So that itself would have taken care if there is any requirement of imposing further revenue generating measures like imposing cess, etc. And at the same time, talking about 15% to the entire commodity group or as a cess is something which is little baffling as far as the industry is concerned, because 40% plus 15% would be about 55% of the tax which they are talking about. Even if enabling provision is really required at that level is a question mark. That is number one. Number two is regarding this centralized registration. The issue was not about any revenue loss, not because that the states are suspecting that there will be a revenue loss because of lack of centralized centralized registration, because GST is a destination-based consumption tax. Wherever the consumer or the customer is located, that state will definitely get the revenue, even if you have a centralized registration. So the issue behind this reluctance on the states is who will control them. If I have adopted a centralized registration process, then the state in which they are registering only one state will have the control over them, and that will deprive the other states of the control. And that is the only thing perhaps playing in the state's mind, not to agree for a consensus as to whether the centralized registration is possible for a industry like FS sector or a
banking
IT
and financial services
sector. So it is mainly kind of a phobia about controlling the assessee is playing behind this. As long as that is not addressed.
And that is a valid concern that you raise, Sachin. But let me get Rashmi to comment on that, and I'll get Rohan Shah to comment on that as well. This business of the division between the centre and the states, and the Finance Minister, as he started his address in Parliament, spoke about how the same assessee should not have to face multiple tax authorities and so on and so forth. There is the 90-10 split, and then there is the 50-50 split. But from an administration point of view, we don't know what the mechanism is going to be in terms of that 50-50 split. Who gets to, who comes under the centre's ambit, who comes under the state's administration, how will that be decided? There is still no clarity on that. Rashmi, you want to start with that?
Yes. So that's a very good point, Shireen. Because the thing is, when you read the law as it is presented in the Parliament today, those nitty-gritties are yet to be out as to how the administration of the state is going to be like,